which we had the link earlier in the week, it seemed like we could do it, tonight we can't do it. So we're gonna have to reschedule him. But the good news is we have Paul Hart. And he's just
knowledgeable.
He's gonna be our new historian, I think, for the town. He is gonna talk about the lighthouse, and our next program is gonna be June 10th, and that will also be Paul Hart about the post offices and the mailing in Barkhamsted. So we'll turn off some of these lights and I'll take it on.
Well, we had a bus tour a couple of weeks ago. The Barkhamsted Historical Society is a member of a consortium of historical societies from Barkhamsted to Farmington, and it's called the Farmington Valley Heritage Network, and every year that group puts on a bus tour, and the theme this year was lively lore and legends, fact or fiction. And the first stop on the bus tour was at Squire's Tavern, and we gave a presentation on the Barkhamsted Lighthouse. The Barkhamsted Lighthouse fit that theme perfectly because the lighthouse story is made up of both fact and fiction. You know, some of it's legend that can't really verify the facts, but there definitely are facts behind it. So that was when we were told that we were going to contribute 2 programs in this bus tour, that was an obvious choice, the Barkhamsted Lighthouse. Where is the Barkhamsted Lighthouse? First of all, how many of you have been, or how many have heard of the Barkhamsted Lighthouse?
Heard of it.
Didn't you, someone had a program on that here, I don't know how many years ago.
We've had Ken Fader here many times for our historical society and different organizations. So I'm not surprised at all that most of you have heard it. How many have been to the site? The Historical Society now has a short circular trail that goes through the site. Before that, I think that was 2011, we put in that trail with some interpretive signs. Before that, you could walk through that area and not know anything was there unless you had sharp eyes. When I gave this program, that yellow star was on Squire's Tavern, but we're basically across the street. Where are we? In here somewhere. But that's where the lighthouse is. This is Barkhamsted, of course. There's the Seville Dam. Pleasant Valley is right down here, and Riverton's up here. So it's pretty much, you know, 2/3 of the way from Pleasant Valley to Riverton on East River Road.
Oh.
And as I said, there's not too much to see there. This is a picture. That's the start of the Lighthouse Trail and one of the other state forest trails. But up here, the cemetery's located up there, but you'll notice that it's just woods. It's part of People's Forest now, and there's not a whole lot there. This is a 1878 Tilden map of Connecticut, just showing the Barkhamsted portion. And if you got sharp eyes, look at that lighthouse, and they got a lighthouse icon.
Look at the railroad.
Yes, major feature. But of course, the lighthouse is a metaphor, and I'll get into that a little later. You know, there. Yes.
Paul, what's the cemetery you were talking about?
The lighthouse community had a cemetery. They don't know exactly how many are buried there, but estimates are 50 to 100 people.
Wow.
And our prime characters are Jane Shoggan and Molly Barber are buried there in that cemetery.
Are there gravestones?
You know, there's no gravestones that, like we think of, that have inscriptions on them. But there are stones sticking up out of the ground.
When was the A dropped from Barkhamsted?
Well, by 1878, I'm surprised to see them with an A in it, because by that point in time, A's were few and far between for Barkhamsted. Earlier in the 1700s, you would see it now and then, but I'm surprised that it's on there. You know, now you don't see it at all, really. Let me give you the legend of the Barkhamsted Lighthouse. It starts when, you know, we're not really sure, but in the early to mid 1700s. Molly Barber was growing up in Weathersfield, and she had an overbearing father. When she became of age, she had a number of suitors, and none of them pleased her father. He turned them all aside, and her latest one she wanted to marry, he said no, and she said, darn it, I'm gonna marry the next guy that comes along. And the legend says that the next guy that came along was a Narragansett Indian by the name of James Shawgan. The legend says he was actually working for Mr. Barber, who was a rich guy in Weathersfield and had staff, gardeners and stuff, and he was one of the workers. And he heard Molly make this proclamation, and he said, here I am. And so they eloped, they took off, this is a mystery to me, someone they knew married them, and they took off, and the legend indicates that they ended up in Canton for a while, but the searchers that the father sent out to try and find them were getting closer and closer, and they decided they better leave the Indian Hill area in Canton. I don't know if you know Indian Hill. I think Route 44 goes over Indian Hill. It's not far from Satan's Kingdom. So they figured they better go a little further into the middle of nowhere, which is what Barkhamsted was. And when are we talking? We're not really sure, but it could be late 1730s, 1740. There were almost no one else here in Barkhamsted at the time, if that is the right period. That's one of the mysteries of this legend, is exactly when did all this happen. They came to Barkhamsted on the lighthouse site, East River Road, and built a cabin. They had kids. They had 8 kids. One died in infancy. They had 7 kids. Some of the kids got married. And there was a community known as the Lighthouse community that sprang up at that site. And after a while,
I'm sorry, where'd that picture come from?
well, I knew I was going to be telling the legend on this slide, and I wanted to show you something. There's no images of James and Molly. So I went on the internet to find something that's not very hokey. I didn't want downright clip art, but I found this, and
They'd be very pleased.
the period clothing is probably not the most accurate, but it's close. And actually, James Shawgan, Narragansett Indian, but he grew up in white society, so he might have been, sorry about that, he might have been wearing clothes, white man's clothes. We just don't know.
When you say you're doing the legend, is there any birth or marriage or any records like
Yes.
that?
Yes, I'll get into that.
Okay.
There's facts with this story. So, what did these people do on the side of the hill there? Well, they were farmers, they quarried stone, they made baskets, and these are lighthouse baskets, maybe made towards the end of the period. The Barkhamsted Historical Society has a number of lighthouse baskets. They made brooms, they worked as day laborers, so they did a number of things. They were farmers.
How long was the community active? Until when?
James and Molly, when they showed up, that's the big question, maybe 1740, and by the time of the Civil War, they were gone. When the Industrial Revolution started to bite, they either went to jobs in urban areas or went west for better farmland. The farmland in People's Forest on East River Road is not that great on the side of that mountain.
Harvest homes all day long.
Yeah. A lot of rocks.
Stone soup.
Paul, how did the Historical Society acquire the baskets from the lighthouse? Were they?
We had 1 or 2 donated to us years ago, and I'm not sure from where.
Okay.
But Doug Roberts had a huge collection of lighthouse baskets, and the Roberts family has donated those to the Historical Society. I don't know, Noreen, do you know how many we have?
No, I
20,
don't.
20 or 30 at this point?
Didn't we get a basket from the lady down in
Connie.
Connie?
Yeah, Doug gave Connie 3 baskets, I think in 2015 when they had their reunion here.
Yeah.
And she gave us one of the baskets, but at that point, we already had a couple. But just recently, the Roberts family has given us the bulk of the ones that Doug Roberts had.
Paul, is there any story attached to the finding of those baskets, how they happened to find them and how they survived all those years?
Not that I know of. But they were making baskets over there, so people in Riverton probably had these baskets, including the Roberts family. Roberts family has a long history in Riverton.
Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
actually, the Roberts family owned this land when it was purchased by the DAR to contribute to People's Forest. I believe the land was bought from the Roberts family. Because right across the road, the Roberts family had their big asparagus, a portion of their asparagus farm, right across the road from the lighthouse. So how did it get its name? Where did the lighthouse name come from? Well, this is the legend right here. Eventually, you know, by 1773 or 4, there was a road going up where East River Road is basically now. It was called the Wolcott Road. And then that turned into the Farmington River Turnpike, and there were a couple stagecoach lines on that road. And the legend says that when the stagecoach was coming back, heading towards Hartford, it was nighttime or approaching nighttime, and they would pass the lighthouse, the cabin, and see light from the hearth. And the legend says that the stagecoach driver would call out to the passengers, "There's the Barkhamsted Lighthouse. We have 5 more miles to port." Meaning port is their next stop in New Hartford. You know, so they, after going through a lot of the woods, they got their bearings and knew they were 5 miles from their next stop. And can you imagine over the years how many passengers heard that? This term, Barkhamsted Lighthouse, spread all over the place and became famous. That's why it ended up on Tilden's map in 1878. So a volunteer artist who's in attendance tonight did this lovely drawing. Bonnie. And the legend, most of the legend comes from this book. You've probably heard of Lewis S. Mills. There's a high school in Burlington named after him. He was an educator and interested in local history. Now, he had access to some of the stories about the Barkhamsted Lighthouse. In 1879, it was the 100th birthday of Barkhamsted, and we had a huge birthday party in Barkhamsted Center. Supposedly, like 4,000 people attended this. And William Wallace Lee grew up in Pleasant Valley, not far from Squire's Tavern, and he was the featured speaker at the big 100th anniversary, and he talked for hours, and part of his address included the story of the Barkhamsted Lighthouse and what he knew about it, from not only his experience, but from talking to James Eggleston, who grew up in Pleasant Valley while the lighthouse was there. And so there were some facts out there, and I think Lewis Mills pulled together a lot of these facts. As a matter of fact, in the back of this book, he shows you the facts that he got and was working with. But this book is not your normal history book. This book is a poem. The lighthouse legend in this book is actually a poem. So if we go back to here, I actually have, I took out some of what's in his work. And when the stage came through the night past the lonely Indian cabins, the driver, seeing rays of light, shouted gladly, "There's the lighthouse." So that's an excerpt from his poem. But I think that this came out in 1952, and this helped really spread the legend. But I think Lewis Mills used poetic license when he wrote facts in this. There's facts in here, I'm not sure where he got them or how he would have known it. It's not anything that was in the record before that. For example, that Mr. Barber, the father, came from Weathersfield and had Shawgum working for him. We're not sure about that. When a lot of the subsequent research was done on the genealogy of these two, it's surprising. They had more success tracking down James Shawgum's ancestors than they did Molly Barber. And I think part of the problem may have been that Molly may have changed her name. I mean, she was known as Mary but called Molly, but Barber may not have been her last name. So all the researchers trying to track down the genealogy afterwards, maybe they were looking for the wrong name, but they looked in Weathersfield, they looked in Windsor, they looked all around here, and Molly's background is a mystery.
Off the grid.
This is another section of the poem. Here they built their cabin on the side of Ragged Mountain near the sparkling Tunxus River in the town of Fair Barkhamsted. Here they dwelt while years rolled onward, bringing children to the cabin, lonely cabin on the mountain, 8 in all, the silence breaking in the lovely lighthouse cabin. That's 8 kids, but one, as I said, died in infancy. Now, there are facts behind this legend, and of course, a lot of you may know Kenny Fader, who has done a lot of work on the lighthouse, and he wrote the book, literally, on the lighthouse. And he's done a lot of research, and this is from his research. He looked into land records, and there's a lot of land records with James Shawgum and some of the kids, and some of the kids' spouses. But
We
you'll
have that
notice
book.
1770 is the first one. Now the theory is, we think they did come early. Probably it's 1740 plus or minus. And they probably did not own the land. The land in Barkhamsted was given to 106 Windsor taxpayers. And eventually, the estate of the Windsor taxpayer who owned that land probably, was worried about squatters on their land. But at some point, they started purchasing land. So they were there. It is in the record.
There's Mary and Molly Shawgum on that list in several places.
Yeah, and some of these, I know, let's see,
There's Mary and Molly right together there.
yep. And Isaac Jacklin was African American, married one of the daughters or granddaughters, I'm not sure.
And there's 2 more Marys.
One of my favorite facts of the Barkhamsted Lighthouse is sitting down in the town hall. There's a leather-bound book, and it's just wonderful because it has cattle brands in it. Now, we think of a cattle brand as a hot iron you put on the cow, but that isn't the system they used. They used a system of notches in the ear. And these notches were recorded. And look at that, James Shawgum, December 2nd, 1785. So if you're eating lunch and you're looking out on your lawn and you see a cow out there with notches like this, bring that cow back to James Shawgum. It's his. And the reason they had this book is the early settlers, when they got to Barkhamsted, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to build a cabin. Then they're going to cut trees and try and get in a crop. It's going to be years before they can put up their system of fences that separated the animals from their crops. So most of these animals for the first 5 years, early years of Barkhamsted, were running around loose, relatively loose. So they needed a branding system for when they got away. And this book down in the town hall, still down there, is a wonderful thing. And most of the entries are before 1800. There's a few after 1800. you know, by the time you get to the 1820s, most people had their fence system up and running. And loose animals weren't such a problem. But James did have cattle, and we think he kept them down in an island in the Farmington River. And I don't know, floods may have changed things around, but if you know up the road from here where that abutment is, that stone abutment that's kind of in the river, was built by the CCCs in the 1930s. Well, that goes out to an island, and I wonder if that isn't the island he kept his cattle on. That's a fairly big island. And a lot of the farmers back then would keep their cattle on an island in the river. Kenny Fader started doing archaeology at the lighthouse site. These are the years that he was there. And you know, he would bring his students there, the field school they called it, usually in June. They would come and the students would get field experience, cheap labor. And so this compiled all the artifacts from all 4 years he was there. This is so over 12,000 artifacts. In talking to Kenny, I do know, you know, you can get a general idea from the ceramics and some of the other stuff. How old is this? Most of this stuff was indicating, you know, 1800s, early 18 and mid 1800s. There wasn't a lot of stuff there from before 1800. They did find some coins, and I think the earliest coin was in 1806, a British halfpenny. Of course, when James and Molly there, two people, you know, initially aren't producing a lot of glass, nails, and other artifacts. It's only when they had a community of, you know, maybe a dozen houses that a lot of these artifacts were being produced, and that's in the 1800s.
Pipes would be tobacco pipes?
Yeah, those kaolin is a type of pottery like. They were long. Yeah. And supposedly you can get an idea of the age from those by the diameter of the hole in the kaolin pipe. But you need a large number, I guess, to do that. I don't know. A lot of artifacts. Over at the historical site, over at Squire's Tavern, we do have a lighthouse display, and some of these artifacts, including, I think, that English halfpenny, are on display. And that is Kenny Fader and some of the students. This is a map of the site. Now, East River Road, I think, yeah, this road, and the cemetery would be up there. So East River Road would be down here, and the cemetery's right there, so kind of get oriented. So on this site, on this map, I think there's, 10? I think there's 10 foundations or cellar holes. Some of them are almost in, you know, they're very faint. Some of them are, like that one right there, near the road, and near where the trail goes in, is very distinct. Now, Walt Landgraf did a lot of research on the town records, and he was convinced that James and Molly's cabin was up here toward, you know, Pleasant Valley is this way, the road and the river are here. The river's flowing this way. So he thought James and Molly's cabin was up here, a little closer to Riverton, about maybe a quarter of a mile from here. And Kenny's last year, he did some test pits up near there and found some stuff. But these are charcoal pits. I think when I mentioned what did they do for a living, I neglected to mention they made charcoal. It was 4 charcoal hearths on the site. And somewhere I read that people were interested that these foundations kind of are in a semicircle, which didn't surprise them because some Indian settlements were set up that way. So I just thought I'd pass that along. And up here by this structure is a quarry. And on the Lighthouse Trail, I think it's right there. Yes, stone mortar. There's a stone mortar right on the trail. You know, it's a rock that has, you can see where it's got a shallow area where they ground corn, probably corn. So there's a lot of interesting things on the site. But like I say, if you walk through here, it's like woods. You don't really see these things. If you look close, you can see these slightly raised and level charcoal hearths. And obviously the quarry, you can see the quarry marks still in the stone.
Paul, when the charcoal hearths were operating, or they were making the active charcoal, did they throw off any light?
No. No, they would take hardwood and pile it up and then cover it. It was covered with dirt and then leaves, I think. And you didn't really burn it, you charred it. And then they would adjust how much oxygen got in by opening up holes or closing holes. There would have been smoke, but no light. Because if that thing started burning, and like I say, it had this covering, so you wouldn't see the embers. Even the embers wouldn't be visible, but it would give off smoke.
So the trail going up the side of the hill is like right in the middle of that map,
It's right there.
on the map?
Yes, it's right
That's right,
there.
it's right there.
Now, there's actually two People's Forest trails. I think the trailhead sign says, oh my, I forgot her name. What's her name?
Jesse Gerard?
Yes, thank you. Jesse Gerard. Jesse Gerard is the main trail. It comes up here, goes over here, and then up, and eventually goes to the nice lookout that's up in People's Forest, a wonderful lookout. This is the Falls Cutoff Trail that goes up the very steep part where there's a brook, intermittent brook. But the Lighthouse Trail is basically, you know, that right in this section, all three trails are on the same trail. The Lighthouse Trail goes over here and goes around and comes back. It's very short. But at this point, if you take a right, you're on the Jesse Gerard Trail. If you take this left, you're on the Falls Cutoff Trail. I don't know what that is. In this picture, you see that rock? There's a plaque on that rock, and that's the plaque. This portion of People's Forest was given by the Connecticut Daughters of the American Revolution, 1929. Near this spot was the site of an Indian village. Because if you have heard Kenny Fader's programs on the Lighthouse, he usually tells the story of finding this. Kenny is involved in the Farmington River Archaeological Project, and he's done all kinds of sites throughout the Farmington Valley, but a lot of them in People's Forest. He's been in other areas, and I think it was the first year he was just sending the students over the mountainside looking for potential sites. They didn't even know about the lighthouse, and they encountered it accidentally. And he said he could see some of the cellar holes and foundations, but they weren't typical ones. And he wondered what was going on, so they broke for lunch on East River Road. One of the students walked over to that rock and called Kenny over and said, "Could this be important?" The fact that it says there was an Indian village here. And that's when Kenny realized something really was here and that he didn't know what it was about, and then he started to do the research on it.
You got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it was, what was that, 2010, 2011, he did his last dig up there with the field school. But relatively recently, 2017, I think, you were there, right,
Yeah.
Christie?
Probably somewhere around there.
They always wanted to bring this radar rig, you know, ground penetrating radar up to the cemetery. And possibly they could get an idea how many people were buried up there. And so that's what this is. That lady, Debbie Surabian, was from the Agricultural Service, I think, had the radar. And they brought it up there, and it was very disappointing. There were too many roots. They couldn't get any readings, so it didn't pan out. But they also checked the little weed cemetery over on East River Road, just below Squire's Tavern. There's 3 or 4 graves over there on the side of the road. And they did that, and they found out, I think there were 2 more people buried in there that didn't have headstones. So the trip out here wasn't a total loss. And that was from that day that they had the ground penetrating radar. And I just love this. Matter of fact, Christy, that's you. There's some archaeological firepower right there, because that is Brian Jones. That site in Avon, the Paleo Indian site in Avon, is named after him. He took over as the state archaeologist from Nick Valentoni, who's right there, and that's Kenny, and that's Dr. Mark Banks, who's also in archaeology. So I really like to get that picture of those 4 together, because Brian Jones died like months later, a year? Oh no, it was like a couple of years later, I think Brian Jones died. And that's the ground penetrating radar in action.
So the stones you see are like the stones that they think are marking graves.
Yeah, see, there's one. Kenny had his students look at every stone, trying to see if any inscriptions, no inscriptions. They did a count. I don't remember how many they found, like 30 stones that could have been markers, but you don't know. Plus, I think over the years, it was common knowledge that was a cemetery, and I think people were digging in there trying to find stuff. I think that site's been changed over the years quite a bit. And there used to be a fence around it, like a short palisade fence that the CCCs put in. Camp White was, basically across the river from this site, and they did improvements in people's forest, and this is one of the things they did, is they put a fence around the cemetery, but that's long gone. It was a wooden fence. Now, this is Connie Dubois. She is related to James and Molly through, I think, the daughter Hannah. She lives in Louisiana, and she's made it her life's work to track the genealogy of James and Molly. And I tell you, if she printed out all her research, it'd be a stack of papers front and back, like this high. It's unbelievable. And Kenny thought he hit the jackpot when he made contact with Connie, because he got a lot of information from her. And this is at Squire's Tavern, Connie and Doug Roberts looking through some of her papers. And Connie organized a family reunion in 2015. They marched in our 4th of July parade. They had like between 40 and 50 descendants. This is in front of the barn at Squire's Tavern. And she was planning another reunion for 2020, but COVID kind of threw the kibosh on that. And I think she's up to like 200 people that might potentially come now, as she's found more and more people. But they're planning one for 2025. That's anybody in a red t-shirt in that is a descendant. That's Ken Fader and his wife. But that's the 4th of July Parade 2015. That was pretty neat that they were here at that time and marched in the parade. And 2011 is when we put in that trail with DEET helping us, the Historical Society. And of course we had Connie come to say a few words and unveil it. That's Connie right there talking at the entrance. And that's a nice shot of Connie unveiling the biggest of the interpretive signs. There's smaller ones up on the trail. And the 3rd graders come too, and usually walk the trail, and Historical Society gives them the background of it. The lighthouse site is on the National Register of Historic Places. It's on the Connecticut Freedom Trail, and it's a state archaeological preserve. There's about, I don't know what it's up to now, 45 or so archaeological preserves. And we have 3 in People's Forest, and this is one of them. And when you have an archaeological preserve, some of them, not all of them, have a booklet associated with it, and Kenny put together a booklet, and we sell these for $5 at Squire's Tavern. It's a nice, really nice summary of the story. And that's Kenny's book. That came out, I think, in the 1990s. He wants to update it. I think he's working on an update of it. Why is the lighthouse important? It's a wonderful love story, especially from Molly's aspect. I mean, here supposedly she's a rich white woman and marries a Narragansett Indian, moves to the woods, and has to eke out a living in the woods. I mean, what a contrast. But that whole story is just a nice story, even if some of it is legend. James and Molly were very early settlers. They could have been among the first settlers here, so that's important. And the lighthouse was a mixed race community, and that was unusual for this town in that time period, so that's why it's important. That's it. You can turn those lights on, and there's refreshments in back there to enjoy, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Paul, I had heard years ago that the lighthouse name came from the stagecoach group, but the stagecoach was at a high point in Colebrook and saw the lights from the cabins that were higher up on the mountain.
I haven't heard that.
And
I agree with him, that's what I heard.
The stagecoach was in Colebrook and saw the light?
Well, that route goes right through Colebrook, and Colebrook is one of the highest points on the road out to Albany. And that from that point, you could say, we see the lighthouse, and we are such and such a amount of time from.
I've never heard that. I know there is a legend, I think it's a legend, I don't think it's factual, that, you know, back 1730s, 1740s, there were Indian threats here. And supposedly James Shawgam would go up on the lookout and set a bonfire to warn the people in New Hartford. I wonder if that's tied in with that somehow. I don't see how it's possible they would see the light from their heart in Colebrook. I don't care how high they were.